quite a while. Got a bunch of kids doing faith in style. They'll tell you that you're awesome and you're not alone. So let's start the show. Who knew Catholics could be so much fun? Greg and Jennifer and how faith is done. Screwing up and trying and forgiving. Adventures in imperfect living. Adventures in imperfect living.
Hey, greetings, folks. My name is Greg Willits from RosaryArmy.com.
And I'm Jennifer Willits, his wife.
Welcome to another edition of Adventures in Imperfect Living. Super glad to have you here. Thanks to all of you who are watching it on YouTube and have to click the like, subscribe, share, comment, multiply it 3 times over, send it into space, let it come back. We have 2 times as many viewers then, and that's Catholic magic. I don't know. Glad to have you with us for the program. Got another great show for you in store for you. Another interview this week with someone who we just met ourselves. And as soon as we found out about this work that they were doing, just because we've talked about so many mental health issues in recent years and months, and we keep hearing from so many of you. I know we just did a show a few weeks ago about EMDR, talked about it. That was the title of it. We talked about a lot more on this. But this one really is going to be focused on mental health issues, and particularly for those of you who are either dealing with mental health issues or know someone. And we're seeing more and more studies. If you look at the last 3 years since COVID, suicide rates are up, depression is up, anxiety is up, mental health issues are up, and a lot of Catholics are desperately seeking help in this regards. And so a few days ago, we got an email from these good folks, Patrick Coffin and Ryan Moreau. They're trying to start this new conference. It's going to be launching on March 18th. It's called Hope is Fuel. You can find it at hopeisfuel.com. And rather than us trying to regurgitate the whole thing, we'll share some of our feedback and some of our thoughts afterwards. We want to jump right into this interview with our brand new friend, Ryan Moreau from hopeisfuel.com. So we started talking about mental health issues about 5 years ago, Ryan, on our show. And I don't know if you look back, and we've shared this so many times, for all the years that we were on Sirius XM radio, for all the years that we did podcasting before that, talking about mental health issues, wouldn't do it. I wouldn't even approach it, wouldn't even come close to talking about it. But then about 5 years ago, sort of like your story, something happened that it came so much to the forefront that it was something that we had to talk about. And then when we did talk about it, we started hearing from so many people that were either dealing with really severe mental health issues themselves, or they had someone in their house or someone close to them that was dealing with that. And so when you sent the email to me the other day, having not heard of hopeisfuel.com, not knowing about this conference, and quite honestly, you and I had never communicated ever before, it resonated with me what you're trying to do. Because it feels like not a week goes by that we don't hear from someone. From your perspective, that had to have played similar type of thing in the onus for wanting to create this conference. So talk about the conference. Talk about what was the final straw that said we have to do something about this right now.
Yeah, I think that. Well, first, obviously, thanks for having me join you guys. And it's an exciting topic. I would say in a way now a little bit differently than it used to be, because the topic isn't as taboo as it was. Knowing your story, Greg, and me getting to share a little bit of mine with you before we got together here, albeit, mostly through email, although I think we talked once on the phone. It was something that doing what I do as an entrepreneur, I was an athlete in college, it wasn't the same story that you had, but at the same time, it was the same hiding it, because it's not something that everybody's excited to talk about. And because you don't have a lot of people talking about it, you don't even really know how to approach it, how to articulate it, what you should say. This might make me look or feel like less of a man in this area, or this, as a dad, or I don't want my kids to know. In this case, and obviously we have some time to really unpack this, but for me, the last straw was in following, we'll call it the height of the COVID era. Depending on, I guess, where you live right now, you might still be in the COVID era, but I left California and we're in Idaho, and we left California in December of 2021. And when we left in that previous year, I had two companies that were mine that had suffered greatly because of COVID, had pulled in other people, close friends, into a few projects I was working on the investment side, and it didn't work out. And I'm going, my goodness, I've things have slowed down. I've got to start paying these people back. I've got to figure out some solutions. As that happened, our closest family friend, who's truly their entire family was very responsible for my reversion, my wife's conversion. She was diagnosed with cancer. They had 6 kids. She's diagnosed with cancer March 25th, 2021, and passes away July 2nd. I think that was the time. It was like a 13-week window. So all these things are happening, and I'm of course close with her husband, and we're having conversations. He's not knowing how to deal with what's going on. Little do they know, seemingly my life's blown apart at the seams, just from a financial perspective at that time. And I had dealt, Greg, with some, and Jennifer, with some serious anxiety issues back in 08, 09, and there's different ways to unpack that as well, but very few people knew about that. I was dealing with panic disorder, clinical depression at that time, and ultimately general anxiety disorder. Was able to get through that through things like behavioral therapy, but again, because it was a taboo topic, never really talked to too many people about it. In 2021, knowing we were going to move, so you have basically perfect storm, death ultimately in the family. We had dealt with some other things, suicide in the family, a myriad of different things that we would keep kind of sliding and put on the happy face and keep pushing. And hey, suffering's bringing us closer to Christ. Let's suffer well, and that's all great. But the reality is, you're still suffering, and suffering is not easy. If I remember right, Jesus was sweating blood.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so for us,
You get to praying that 4th decade of the sorrowful mysteries, carrying the cross, and you're like, I thought you said you did this for me, Jesus. It's not, I thought this was supposed to be a little bit lighter of a yoke than what it is right now.
Totally. Yeah. It makes taking up your cross and following me, it brings on a different feel to that. And, and being a male, not always basing everything off of my feelings, I would operate up here in my head a lot, and probably, really contributed to the anxiety and the stress and the pressure and all those things that were going on. So I guess this is a long-winded way of saying that the final straw for me came when we moved. We were originally going to move in August. We stayed there to stay in Southern California to help our friends as much as possible through that transition. I have 4 daughters. We have a son on the way, but we have 4 daughters while we were there, and they're very close to the children. And so just to really support them, and in the midst of giving yourself away, you're also got these other weights that are coming onto you, and you have almost nothing left. By that November of 2021, right before we moved, I was visiting with folks, old friends from high school, these kinds of things that you wouldn't do every day, but those were starting to add up. And one night I was sitting at a dinner with a bunch of high school buddies, and it was like one of those things you see in the movies, back in the day, where the guy's like trying to get his pills for his ulcer kind of thing. I'm sitting there and I'm like hunched over, and they're going, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I'm fine. I'm just got a lot going on. I got a lot going on," right? Which is what you say to people when you don't really want them to know. It's just like, "Hey, I'll leave him alone. He's got a lot going on." So as we were sitting there, one of them was just like, "Man, you need to get out of here. Like, you don't look right." And that scared me a little bit, because I'm not 21 at the time. I'm 41 at the time, and so that was a bit concerning. Different things can happen. So I ended up going and finding a functional medicine doctor, actually, because I run the gamut of things, many years before, and I really wanted to get to the root cause. And I know that's the idea of functional medicine, is root cause. So I'd gone to these folks, and they found, by the time I was done there, and they'd put me through psychologists and chiropractors and MDs and nurse practitioners and blood tests, and my system at that point was so off. You guys, I mean, the intolerances to food, to no, don't take, the things everybody's telling you to take, like probiotics or something, like you have too much of this and not enough this. And by the end, they had diagnosed me with clinical burnout, clinical depression, general anxiety disorder, panic disorder, vagus nerve dysfunction, and I'm sure there are others. And
What's the vagus? That was in your bio. What's the vagus nerve dysfunction? What is that?
Vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is, and guys, I am not a health professional, but I obviously have learned a lot in this process.
That's okay. We'll hold you accountable totally to any scientific thing that you say.
I'm looking all over for the disclaimer here. So, by the way, in Opus Fuel, we have, of course, folks reminding us of disclaimers over everything for this very reason, in spite of the fact of us having a series of psychologists and psychiatrists and Bishop Strickland and others that are having this conversation. But the vagus nerve is what I guess they refer to as the 10th cranial nerve. And vagus in Latin means wandering. So it's the longest nerve in your body, and it runs, I believe, from near your brainstem or from that area into your stomach. And so it's actually responsible for the proper function of your heart. Like when people have a heart arrhythmia, it can impact that. When people have lung issues or breathing issues or asthma, it actually can contribute to that. Kidneys, and this is stuff you can just go Google yourself, right? If you say, "Oh, Ryan's crazy," or this is because he's doing whatever kind of weird health, guys, I've been everywhere, right? From run-of-the-mill to this is a commonly known thing, but it's really not understood well because it is wandering and it is all over your body. And could it be? I was actually, as I was learning about it, I'm like, maybe it's pinched. That I'd always heard of a pinched nerve. Maybe that's what's causing all the heart arrhythmias. And so anyway, the vagus nerve, the dysfunction, they said I was operating at like 42%. So I don't know if that meant that, there's a myelin sheath usually around it. I have a sister with MS, so I'm a little bit familiar with how nerves work. And they say that it can kind of like disintegrate, I guess. And so there's just different things that can happen. We didn't get that far. They were convinced through some different things that I was doing that I'd be able to recover, which would actually help a lot of symptoms. So when you're dealing with anxiety, you're dealing with these cortisol all over the place. Your body's just completely out of whack.
Yeah,
so
we talked about Jennifer and I. This was such a revolutionary phrase for us to learn in 2018 when things kind of collapsed for me. Was the idea of a cortisol bath. That when something would happen, that cortisol would wash so completely over the brain that it almost made it impossible for any of your positive functions to get through and do something. And so if you fell into that negative pit that so many people with mental health issues deal with, it's oftentimes that cortisol bath, and it needs to be dissipated naturally before you can even start moving on again. It was just frustrating.
Totally. And these are the areas where we don't pay much attention. You just hear, I'm not sleeping well, or I'm not. Well, these are all correlated. And, I'm learning this as a layman, so to speak. But in fact, to the cortisol, they've done a adrenal test on me. And they said that my cortisol, usually your cortisol in the morning will kind of, it'll be at a peak, and over the day, it should just kind of be this nice little slide, like at the park, that just kind of comes down and then it'll come back up again in the morning because you prepare to wake up and get to work. Mine was it didn't start at the highest. It actually started a little bit lower. It would jump up in the first hour of the morning when they were, because they run these blood tests on it. It would slide down quickly, and then from 11:30 to 5, it would actually be higher than it was in the morning. And she said, "You pretty much are doing the equivalent of running from a grizzly bear for about 5 to 6 hours every day, and you've taught your body to do that, which is why at night it's crashing." She's like, the next step for you is that your cortisol and your adrenal system will shut down, and that's going to create a bigger problem.
I'm sitting here smiling and I'm feeling bad for smiling, but at the same time, it's just like, yes, exactly. To be able to commiserate. And that's why it's so important that we as Catholics are talking about these kinds of things, right? And so in your story, you had to have felt very alone at that time.
Yes, because the other part is, on one side, like I said, you're not wanting to tell too much to too many people, especially people that, not just your family, but people are relying upon you, whether it's work or, you might just your sphere of influence, we'll call it. And on another side, the things that you're telling people that you're feeling, when you do tell them, in their mind, they're like, no way, or you go to a traditional, your primary care physician or something, and they run through your basic blood test and they're like, wow, you're 41. You are in great shape. Your cholesterol, and it's not the same for everybody, but it's like your blood sugar looks great. What have you been doing? Fasting? And they want to have a conversation. You're sitting there like, I feel like I'm on a boat right now. I keep going from hot to cold. I know I need to get back to work. I had a very easy life financially. You have no idea that just fell apart because of COVID. And, all these things are going on, and you do feel deeply, deeply misunderstood. So hence the loneliness. Greg, reading your story, of course, and I'm sure you hearing mine, there is a lot of overlap. It may not be the same traumas or losses in your life or experiences, but at the same time, those things heaped off on one another. In fact, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but hope is fuel. But one of our least known guests, quite honestly, is Ann Gillies. And Ann Gillies is I want folks obviously to come to Hope is Fuel to hear her story, but the quick version of it was she had, and I want to, we don't know whose ears are hearing this right now, but to put it kind of lightly, her first husband, she caught him doing things he shouldn't be with their children, their biological children. And she was, of course, devastated and has dealt with the repercussions of that and the trauma and what it did to her own children, especially his son. And she has a group called Restoring the Mosaic in Canada. And she was telling us as we were kind of prepping and who are we bringing in, and because we really want to light some sort of, hope something I'm saying today is really helpful for somebody who's like, I didn't understand why I was freezing. I always heard fight or flight, but things that happened to me, and there were traumatic experiences that would freeze my body. Weird things like that. Well, Anne was telling us that in her research as a psychologist, pretty much every single mental illness that we see right now was started with some trauma. There's very little that just, and I don't want to misspeak again, but from our conversation, it sure sounded like everything could be pinpointed back at some point in time, to some trauma, some stress for a child maybe that wasn't ready. And reading your story, Greg, I'm sure that resonates and what it does to you later. Go ahead.
Well, that's exactly, one of the things that I've started to realize is for all those years that doctors were putting me on prescription this and prescription that and getting me addicted without me realizing, because they weren't considered narcotics. It's just, this is an antidepressant, no big deal. But they weren't telling you about the ramifications of withdrawal from certain things and just all the things I was shoving into my system. And that wasn't the problem. I didn't have what in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was so much touting of the neurochemistry imbalances that were causing depression is what they were saying. And it does make me wonder how many people, have received that kind of pharmaceutical assistance and they didn't need it. They could have been helped in other ways.
So Ryan, I actually would like to ask you a question, if I may, about your personal life, because while we greatly appreciate you sharing some of your story and the events that kind of led to the formation of this Hope is Fuel conference, which we'll talk a little bit about more in greater depth in a moment. But I am just curious, one, how long have you been a husband and a father? And how would you describe the impact of what happened to you affecting those very important roles that you play, like as a husband and as a dad?
Certainly. And I'll use that actually to wrap up that first part, because this is where we got, when do we reach the point that we needed to do something about this, right? In a bigger way. So my wife, Kelsey, and I have been married. It's just over 16 years. We just had our anniversary. And we've been together. She was a junior in college. So it's a little over 19 years. And I know I should answer that quick, but other husbands, I'm sure, understand why I stuttered there, because you also can't take the risk of messing up. So we've been together a little over 19 years and married for 16. My oldest daughter is Lily is 14, and Lila's second. She'll be 13 this August. Presley will be 11 in June, and Puppy will be 9 in June. And then we have a son named TBD. Will be arriving here in the next 4 weeks. I can't announce it here with millions of people.
Yeah, right. Well, congratulations on that.
TBD is an interesting name, but okay if you.
Like, who's gonna struggle with that? What do you call him for short? Just T. No. So as far as the impact on them, so every Thursday, since my girls had started school, and we homeschool now, so but we've kept this rhythm routine, was every Thursday, once they started school, I would take one out to eat. So that way I knew every month we were getting kind of a daddy-daughter date. My wife now fills in on when there's a fifth week, and we try and add, not just when there's a fifth week, we've added her to the rotation, so beyond just, a date night here and there, because as much as I want to claim that we've got it all together, we don't, and date nights are few and far between when you're raising a family, unfortunately. So, but we value those. Anyway, it was a Thursday, around that same time in November that we were talking about, where I was keeled over. I'd started meeting with, I'd met with this doctor and came home, and my youngest daughter, it was her week. And, they've never seen their dad cry, and they've never experienced that type of weakness, we'll call it, it was very humbling. And she came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, I know you don't feel good, so we don't have to go today." And I was like, oh man, even now it could break me, because I could see her face. And I just started crying, like Oh my gosh. And my first thought though was like, I got to get over this quick, you know, because I can't let them feel like I'm not their protector, their provider, their comfort, their stability. And I do have a strong belief in the importance of both roles. Rosary, we recognize, the gift our Blessed Mother is, and on the other side, as a father, I trust that my girls will trust God if they can trust me, God the Father. And so there's a level of like, if I'm weak, if I'm in a sense to their young, minds breaking maybe a covenant that I've created with them, I do have concerns in my own humanity that it impacts the way that they view God. And I would try and use these things as teaching experiences. Um, remind them of things about humility. And this is obviously not what I would choose, and I'm sorry. They would be so graceful about it too. And that's because of their mom. If you were to meet Kelsey, it would make more sense to you. It's a good mix that way. She's very graceful, and another reason we started Hope is Fuel, quite honestly, was not just because of the anxiety I was dealing with. And Greg, I think I mentioned this to you the time we talked. I know women are dealing with things like this of their own, especially with my wife about to have a child. She hasn't had one in almost 9 years. There's concerns about what it'll do to her chemistry and our minds. But furthermore, as we talk to all these people, and you guys hear from somebody once a week, usually a man dealing with some identity crisis right now, dealing with anxiety, dealing with these things, the wives don't know how to handle it, and they want to be there, especially in our faith. They want to be there. They want to support. They want to play this role. They really don't know what to say. And it's a terrible feeling, I know, from my wife, when it's like, she would say things like, don't worry, or it'll get better, or I'm not mad, or it's like she didn't even know. Of course you're not mad. It's your husband. But she didn't know how to handle it. And she hadn't really seen me that way since I was younger, and it wasn't as severe. It was pretty bad with the depression at that time, but it was one we could mask in different ways. To your point about medication, Greg, I was always scared about getting on a loop. It's yeah. I could tell you another story about that, but I won't go there because it'll take too much time. But that was the concern, which is why I went the path that I headed. And funny enough, I would talk about hope with my girls quite a bit, and my wife. I'm not a big goal setter, and even as an entrepreneur who'd really only known success up to this point, until COVID hit and had some things that didn't work. And I think I mentioned I thought I was 6 months from retiring young, and instead we were practically starting over in some areas. I don't want to make it seem worse than it was. There was things that were still going well, but it changes your lifestyle, right? You live to your means, and that was impactful. Um, but the idea of hope, you know, back in 2014, I bought hopeisfuel.com because I had met some people as I had got, I'm talking the domain, because it had, as a non-real goal setter. And I know I'm supposed to do that, and I'm supposed to build my personal brand and look how awesome I am, how great I've done, and you can be like me too. That is not my MO. And what I realized was, there's a lot of things, Catholic or not, Christian or not, that timing and the way the world works. But in the end, most of this comes down to holiness. Like I want to be unified with God. And so there was a level of not wanting to push myself beyond. It's a delicate dance you do, right? Where you're not trying to go outside of God's will, but you also want to bear your talent, and you're trying to figure these types of things out. And so, my wife had known that, and it was crushing to her in the midst of this to know that like I wasn't getting and doing those things right then. It was, you're wrapped up in yourself. And going back to 2014, when I had purchased Hope as Fuel, I was actually praying that particular day. And I was thinking to myself, the only thing that really gets me up is the hope of eternity. Even at that time, the positive time, the only thing that keeps me moving in a business deal is the hope that this thing will turn out to some good. And I don't want to get overly philosophical even on this call, but St. Thomas Aquinas had some great stuff to say about hope and what hope really is, and how there's a sort of a temporal hope and there's an eternal hope. And the other problem I find, especially with us Catholics, is, hey, you'll hear this a lot. Hey, don't worry about it. It's going to get better. At least we got heaven, like that kind of mentality. And I'm like, I'm in hell right now. Like the idea of heaven sounds great, but I can't even, in the midst of a cortisol wash, Greg, you called it, it's very hard for me to really fathom. And so the other part that I realized was you couldn't just go from this hellish sort of feeling to hope, you actually had to get some help first. And once you were able to get some help, at that point, things started to get a little clearer, right? It's kind of that whole be still and know that I'm God. People go, cool, then I'm just going to sit still. And it's like, no, 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 no. We're talking about a posture, that is much different in your mind, your body, your spirit. And so in the same way, when you're dealing with anxiety, it is not as easy as we'd like to believe. The suffering will draw us to Christ on the cross, but a lot of the feelings that you're experiencing make it really difficult to connect with God. It's more like, okay, I know he loves me, but this sure doesn't feel great right now. And actually, Lady of Sorrows is really beneficial there. So I said a lot.
No. And there's so much to kind of chew on there. When you talked about getting the URL in 2014, but it's just now that this is the first time that you're doing the conference, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So I bought the URL. What seemed like a calling at the time, like, Ryan, hope is the fuel of life. And I was like, oh gosh, hope is fuel. And guys, I am by no means a mystic. I'd love to be one, but I've had a couple of these interesting experiences in my life that had to be one. And I bought it. And thankfully, by God's grace, I did not rush something else because I had a few other ideas with it. And it took 9 years to get here. And in fact, I had shared it with a name you guys probably know, Patrick Coffin. And he and I have been friends for some time. And I shared with Patrick, and he just goes, man, I want to talk about this. So he had actually talked about it on one of his Thursday nights, something, that he was doing with his group. And he would ask me about it. And then he came to know what I had been going through. And so, yes, fast forward 9 years and those experiences in 2021. And then, and we can ask about all the little parts, the micro parts of it. But as I was coming out of, 2021, we move in December. I get up here. It's dark. It's snowy. I grew up in Huntington Beach, California, or Fountain Valley, California, basically Huntington Beach. So there's that goes on. I have fallen in love with seasons thus far in my first 16 months. People who live in the seasons listening are probably laughing at me like, yeah, wait for like 2 or 3 more winters, dude. You'll want to go back. But, we're loving it right now. That said, I started to really come out with to some folks that were close to us, like what had really been going on. Why did Ryan disappear? Why did Ryan get quiet? Why, all of those kinds of questions. Are the Moreaus mad at us? Those kinds of things, because people don't really know what's going on. And it was in the midst of that. It was like, I start to share what had happened and what was in every single person, like you both were discussing at the beginning. Everybody was either dealing with something like this or knew somebody dealing with this. And I thought, you know what? There are better ways than what we're being told, which is the equivalent of just throwing a pill at it. Like, let's get to the root of this stuff. Let's go ahead and start to find solutions. And the other issue is I'm basically launching this thing right after COVID, where there's a lot of distrust everywhere, in the church, outside the church, in the media, you name it. Nobody knows who to trust anymore. And so, not to say that I'm the objective, truth holder in all these things, but these are the folks that we brought into Hope is Fuel are people that we like, trust, respect, that we know are operating the same way. Not all are Catholic, and I'm plenty happy with that because what they're sharing is true. And I'm mostly interested in this scenario with what's true. And for some of my friends, that's scary. And I'm like, that's not scary to me. I want to help people. And if it's kind of like, I think of doctors and, maybe the surgeon who was the greatest at operating on hearts. I'm speaking about this from a Catholic perspective. In America, you might want him because you heard he's the best, but you have a very specific surgery. Do you want him because he's the greatest heart surgeon, or do you want the person who you've never heard of that does that surgery 4 times a day? That you actually, and that's how I viewed Hope is Fuel and our lineup and who we're bringing into the equation. But they did need to share that objective that we're fighting a real big battle right now of good versus evil. That's beyond anxiety. That's beyond loss. That's beyond trauma. And in the midst of that, we wanted people who could speak and provide the help and the hope that they would need to ultimately, just the hope will even give you the patience sometime, knowing that, okay, if I put forth the work, if I put forth the effort, I can get through this and ultimately regain their life back, and so that's where I'm at now. But Greg, as you know, it's a constant battle, and that's the cross we get to bear.
Well, let's take a step back and talk about the sort of the mechanics of the conference, right? So it's an online conference, March 18th. Do I got that date right?
Got that date right.
March 18th. It's an online conference, hopeisfuel.com. SHOWNOTES.com. We'll put links to all this, of course, in the show notes. But the idea of this is you've brought together experts in different ways. So you have talks by Bishop Strickland. We could start there. Let me kind of give a little bit of rundown. He's going to be talking about unpacking hope as an eternal survival tool. So we have the faith component there with a bishop that we've had him on the program in the past and we have great trust for. But then you have these other experts, other doctors and other therapists talking about attachment theory, transforming your relationships, treating and beating depression without toxic medication, dealing with fear addiction, which I thought was really kind of interesting, and retaking control of your life, how trauma impacts mental health. That's Dr. Ann Gillies, who you talked about, is going to be talking about that. How to face and defeat generalized anxiety disorder, which is something I was also diagnosed with, so I'm interested in that too. And then the idea that you also have a segment in there on addiction to technology leading to anxiety and despair. When I looked at this rundown of the talks that'll be there on that day, and you're going to have these talks, and then for people that sign up for all these talks are free, if I saw that correctly, but then they can they could pay to be able to access live Q&As and to have all these talks on demand so that they can watch them at their own pace afterwards. When I looked at all these, I'm thinking, is this going to be sort of a triage situation where these talks are going to help someone right there on the start of this as soon as they watch these? Or is this just going to be the impetus of the hope that they need to propel them down a further road? How would you respond to that? What could people expect if they watch these talks, they participate, and even if they sign up as paid members of this?
Great question. And I don't think you can paint it with a broad brush. I think that there will be people, and when you mentioned the triage, I think that there will be some people that come on. Well, a good example of this is my sharing with you the story of my cortisol test. And I could see, we're looking at each other right now. I could see you be like, yes, like somebody really understands that. That understanding a lot of times will get people to step 2, in whatever it is they're doing. I think that most people who are either dealing, when I say most, I mean, that's because I'm afraid to say all, just in my weakness. But the reality is every person who comes on this will be able to glean something to benefit either for themselves or somebody close to them. They will be able, and we purposely had all of these speakers for this reason, to be able to be able to touch on some of the key areas, right, that where folks might be struggling. Now, I do think so. Each speaker has an hour, with the exception of Bishop Strickland. I want to make sure everything is transparent there. Bishop Strickland has done a pre-recorded video for us on a topic we've had a dialogue about. And that pre-recorded video will be the last. He'll be the last speaker of this because we want to wrap this thing with a bow. And he, in that talk, will speak about eternal hope in a very, very articulate way, simple, easy to understand, and something I believe, that all Christians can glean from, even outside of Catholics. But of course, he's coming from our position, I guess you could say, and so that's very helpful. And there's a reason we had him there for that reason. He also, at the end of that, will be providing some books and different resources that he'd suggest folks read just from that eternal perspective. But for the people who want to be helped today, that's the big question, right? Is like, if I come to this, is this going to solve my problem today? Nobody's problem will be solved that day. I'd be lying to say it will be. If you've been to therapy, if you've been to behavioral therapy, they don't say, come one time and this is going to be great, you'll be done when you leave. That's not how it works. That you're changing behavior. Some of this stuff, you're changing a mindset. When we think about...
let me jump in there. I feel like in my own healing journey, because I'm not done, right? That it's a series of beginnings, right? Yeah. It's not just a one beginning point. That you're going to find that there's going to be a series of beginnings. And again, one of the reasons, and our audience knows this, we don't have people on the program unless they're doing something that we personally see value in. And I saw this as a potential beginning, particularly for those, and I know I know that the people in our audience that are dealing with these kinds of things or have someone in their family that's dealing with it is a small subsection of our overall audience. And so whenever we talk about these, I always worry, this is going to have a lot less downloads because not everyone wants to hear about mental health issues. But I don't care. I feel like this is important enough that I want this to be yet another beginning point for somebody that's listening right now that's been suffering in the way that we've had to suffer, both me with mental health issues and Jennifer having to live with a spouse dealing with these kinds of things, that this is important enough. And just knowing that Catholics are behind this, Bishop Strickland's behind it, it seemed very critical for us to, I felt a responsibility to have you on the show to talk about this.
Well, thank you. And I do want to be clear. I actually think this goes beyond even mental health, or it's going to help people who don't realize that this is something that's impacting them. Hence us having somebody that's dealing with fear addiction and social media addiction. There are a lot of folks right now that we all know, and there may be more of these people who are like, their hopelessness is more related to maybe what they see on the news or what they think could be coming, down the pike or all these kinds of things. Now, I do want to make clear though, the way that we've set up the 7 speakers prior to Bishop Strickland, they are going to have a talk. There's a pre-recorded talk that's available free to everybody. That day it'll be running. Of course, there's going to be pointing them if they want to access the live Q&A. They want to be able to access the archives, be able to come back to this whenever they can. That's the paid version. We had one marketing company. I mean, again, just transparency. That was like, you guys should be charging $400 to $500, for this. It's 8 hours of this stuff, and these speakers. I know how much they cost for us. We're like, we have to, obviously. I mean, you guys know you're running something. You have to be able to keep it in business. But we want to help people. This is not a one-time thing, but it is a one-time thing right now. I would say for this topic, kind of this macro overview of what's going on with all these different areas. And yes, we will do breakouts eventually, and we'll do workshops, and we'll do this and that. But on that day, here's what you can expect. You can expect an overview. You can expect live interaction. They will be present with us, they being the speakers, for about half of their hour. In some cases, maybe a little bit more.
Well, people will actually be able to ask these experts questions.
Yes, we'll have it'll be one of the chat boxes. They'll be able to ask questions. So if you have a question, bring it. We those will be there, and Patrick's actually hosting this for us, and so he'll be able to check it out just in case you get somebody funny in there wants to ask a weird question. You can block that out, of course.
You can just go ahead and block Greg Willits because he'll be the one asking the weird questions. This is
so funny, but once that hour is up, it doesn't end there, and so I believe 6 of the 8 speakers will be doing we'll call it an Easter egg for those that have paid. And that Easter egg will be a 10 or 15 minute video on a very specific topic. Maybe it's a way you can handle if you have anxiety in this way, or maybe certain level of practices. So look at it like a tutorial or like a brief coaching session, 10 to 15 minutes. And we've asked our speakers to do this really to give something that people could go back to each week if they wanted to, for the next year. And because I'll tell you guys why. There was a relaxation tape that I would use that I was told would help kind of re-steady that nerve function and the autonomic nervous system and stuff that was going on. There were other more expensive things that I was hearing about that would do it. You guys, I would listen to the same one every single day, sometimes 3 times a day, because it was the thing that I could tell little by little. Greg, you called it new beginnings. It would give me that new beginning. That day would spark a little bit of hope. And that's what we need, right? It's just that little spark that'll keep us going and get to that next new beginning. And so that's why it's hard for me to say, yes, nobody's going to be cured that day. But I think that everybody who shows will be helped. It's going to give them tools to help others. And it's going to really help them maybe understand too some of the things that they've dealt with, things that they've experienced, and really in the end, give them some more empathy and compassion for those that are suffering with this all around them all the time. And maybe even some things to look for where they might be able to share or support or whatever it might be right there in their own sphere of influence. So
I wanted to get what advice you might have for those who are living with someone who is afflicted with all these hardships emotionally, because this is like an invisible disease. You can't look at a person and know the war that is happening inside their mind. What would you say to the spouses who may not understand? They may not know if this is the day they need to be walking on eggshells. Like, okay, I can see on the body language, my spouse is totally not themselves right now. They're tanked, depression, whatever, something is raging, and they're in pain. They're in some level of pain that is robbing their loved one of the ability to communicate. Because I think that's another side of this. When you're in that cortisol bath, you don't necessarily have fluency of speech. you can't really beautifully articulate, here's what's happening inside my mind right now, And it's usually like, I can't even make eye contact with you right now because the eyes are the window into the soul and it's black in there right now. So the eyes will stay downcast.
She asks this question as if she has firsthand experience with this. I don't know what she's talking about.
Unbelievable guess, Jennifer, that people might be dealing with this. So gosh, I would say first, obviously we're speaking to a Catholic audience, and so I can get to the real depths of this. The first thing I would say is just be patient. I think, and I say that, and it's like, well, that's a simple answer. But the reality is, you use the word disease, and you said it's like a disease. And I think of the word disease, and I go, yeah, if you broke that up, it's a dis-ease. So the dis-ease is going in both directions, right? There's this dis-ease that's going on with the person that's battling, but there's also a dis-ease, as you mentioned, for the spouse. And so start with patience, right? We talk about grace. This is a real opportunity. It's a different kind of suffering. As you were sharing that, I'd love to give you, and I will give you another answer of way to help. But I think that one way here, since we are speaking to a Catholic audience, is every time that you get to go to the cross, you get close to Christ. And it's okay too for the spouse to be like, this is hard for me. Most of them feel like I now have to be the one who's going to be strong and I'm going to be perfect. And oftentimes it's the wife. I'm going to keep everything in order and I'm going to do what I can to help them come back. And then you go in and out of being frustrated. And it's like, oh no, I need to give them more grace. And then you feel guilty. No, like this is not about guilt. You're one, right? You're one. For the spouse and the husband are one. And so in this particular case, the best advice I could give is just be patient, be graceful, do your part to really let the person know you're available if needed. And if what they need is space and time, do it. My wife has been so good to me. In fact, if you can't tell, just at the pace I operate, right? And having run multiple company, different things, some people, when they sit a day with me, are like, oh my gosh, like that, that's not easy. It's like families that have 10 kids and a family with one kid, and they go, I could never do that. Yes, you could. Just like if you ran marathons, right? And all you run is a mile a day. But a guy who doesn't running a mile a day sounds hard. To a guy who runs a mile a day, a marathon sounds hard. You can always build up to these things. And so for the spouse, I would just really encourage them to be patient and to encourage, and my wife would come in and say, Rye, you're overdoing it. And she knows I'm overdoing it because I'm trying to regain that time that I lost. I'm trying to support the family. I'm trying to do these things. But from a Catholic perspective, she has the eternal perspective. She's like, we're fine. We've got enough to get through this day. And even if we don't, we'll move to a tent. Like, does it really matter? In the grand scheme of things, I want you to be well. Knowing that she cared more about me being well than if we were eating grass-fed that day, as opposed to McDonald's or something. Like, that was enough for me. Because once you realize you're on the same team, it actually takes you down a level too, the person dealing with this, to just go, okay, there's another, and this is really good I would say for spouses as well, to recognize this from the outside. There was a behavioral therapist I went to that, fantastic, in Pasadena, California. And I used to drive to visit him. And in fact, when this happened and I was up here, we would still do Zoom calls. And he had learned from somebody, famous doctor from Australia or something, from the 70s, who kind of figured out what was going on with this anxiety and what it was. And I actually was going to ask him to speak on this, but our panel was full at that point originally. And there's 4 things that we have to do to get through each of those moments when we're in a bad phase. Jennifer, like when you're saying, hey, what do I do when I look at you? I don't want to look in your eye. You just know something's off. Now, the person dealing with it has 4 things. If they do it and they do it well, they'll be able to remember, oh, I've been through this once before. I'm going through it now, and it will be fine again. And the spouse needs to understand that too. And those 4 things are to face. If you're the person, you're facing what you're dealing with in that moment. I've got a cortisol bath going on right now. I've got PTSD from some memory, whatever. Accept. So that's a hard one. So you face what's going on. You recognize it. You accept it. Okay, this is what's happening right now. I'm not dying. I'm not going to die. And again, I'm not a therapist, but I've been through these things a bunch, and this is rung true for me every time. You float. So most people, when they're going through this anxiety, and their spouses, they want to fight. They want to fight back. I'm going to beat this thing, and I'm going to beat it now, and I'm going to pulverize it. But they're saying I'm going to do that knowing that they're completely worn out. So once you face it and once you've accepted, recognize what it is and float through it. Compare it to like a river. What do they tell you if you're in a whitewater rafting trip? They tell you if you fall out of the boat, turn over on your back, spread out your arms and legs, and basically float so that you don't hit things as you fight, right? And then eventually the water will calm and then you can stand up. Think of it that way. So you float and let time pass. That's the part of waiting till you reach that nice area. For a spouse, reminding their other spouse, hey, this is what it is. My wife is excellent at this, right? You felt this before. You felt it 100 times. So you face it, accept it. That's what it is. Be patient with yourself. I'm going to be patient with you, and then let time pass. And little things here. How do I help? Do you need anything? Do you need water? Oh, and then the empathy thing. And I think women are obviously much better at this. The men we'll be like, dang it, I got to go pick up the kids and finish work today. I can't believe the things that my wife can pull off in a full day. And it never ends. But for her to also be willing to be patient with me in that process. I can't stress that enough. And I won't keep going on that. I hope that's helpful. But that, for me, is the number one thing a spouse can do, is understand those 4 things and help their spouse through it if they want it. And then if they don't take offense to it. You're dealing with somebody who is not themselves in that moment.
Oh, that's tough right there. I mean, I learned a couple of years ago not to take things personally, but it is super tempting to take the bad mood or whatever, the emotional flare up of the other, because they're so short with words. They speak from a place of pain and not a place of, kindness. It's like they can't do it. I think you mentioned that a moment ago. They can't jump to a very positive feeling when they're in the throes of emotional pain. So everything is going to go through that painful lens, including the words that's coming out of their mouth, and they don't even realize that they're coming out like daggers. And it's like, okay, either I let that dagger hit me or I put up a shield to deflect them and say, okay, push it off. It's nothing. He doesn't mean it. He's not saying that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say he.
Yeah. Again, this is something that she read, not something that she has experienced firsthand at all. Right.
Well, you guys, I believe you have 5 children, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So, my girls' sports, big soccer, especially Southern Californian coming up here. I mentioned an athlete. I played basketball in college. When I would get hurt, if I'd roll an ankle, my response would always be like, nah, don't, just give me a sec, because you're trying to let the pain subside. So when you're dealing with this with somebody and they're in one of those moments of an anxiety attack, think of it as a proverbial rolled ankle. You wouldn't go over there and start massaging the ankle and be like, it's going to be okay, right? Like, that's not what you do. Is, and you're like, the person be like,
oh, pow! Yeah, that's how you get hit.
Punch you in the face.
So that's the part of the facing, the accepting, and really letting the time pass. It's hard, but be that encourager and reminder, because we also, on the other side of this, right, the one dealing with it recognizes that you are the sane one in this moment.
Yeah.
And because you're sane, I will trust you. But don't tell me it's not that bad, or just remind, hey, you've been here before. You're going to be okay. You're not dying now. You're going to get through this. I'm here to help you. Those kinds of things. And actually, my hope, and that's why I think the spouses need to be at Hope is Fuel just as much as the person dealing with this, or the children should be there, or fine, get the family around it and sit there and watch this down the road, or whatever it might be, because I think the other part is having the understanding of all of these different things that could have been triggers along the way. You mentioned with Nick Carderis, he's on all the news channels across the board talking about his book Glow Kids, and what the social media has done and what technology has done. It would be really helpful if people understood that, hey, just your kid that's on these iPads and phones, I'm not here to knock it. I'm just saying it's provable that this is restructuring their brain. And so when you're getting angry at them, really get angry at yourself. You let the iPad or the television or whatever raise them. And this is, I'm not casting judgment. I've made my own mistakes in this area, just like everybody has. Even those of us who I don't let my kids have a phone. You don't let us have a phone because you want to look cool to your friends. No, I don't let you have a phone because I love you. But then at the same time, we have 2 family phones and they're still on the videos watching how to bake this thing. There's always a way around it. So helping them understand why you could get to this point, why we're operating so fast. A lot of the trauma we're experiencing is unseen, just like you can't see the anxiety stuff. And it's the pace of life that we're living. You can't slow down enough. And so hearing some of these speakers, Peter Bregan, he should be called Peter Hope, Peter Bregan talking about, in the end, depression is simply the loss of hope. That for me hit right between the eyes. It's like, yeah, that's exactly right. So it'll be great.
I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that statement. I mean, it's very hard, when you know that we're, especially, you're praying the rosary, right? And at the beginning of the rosary, you say for an increase in faith, hope, and love, and you pray those 3 Hail Marys at the beginning. And that hope, I'd almost get bitter and angry in the midst of those depressions when we're praying those family rosaries, and I'd ask for that increase, and I wouldn't believe it was possible anymore, but it is. And again, that's why we wanted you to be on the program. The website is hopeisfuel.com. We'll put links all over the place. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see it up on the screen. It's even popped up on our TV in the background a few times as we've been talking. And just, Ryan, really appreciate you putting this together. I hope people go check it out. Go to hopeisfuel.com. Live event on March 18th, 2023. But if you pay for it, then you can have it, and which I kind of prefer anyway, to watch it on my own pace, because I feel like I have a hard time with fire hose learning, where you're just like, open up the fire hose, take it all in. I need to process this. And so I love the fact that you're offering that opportunity for people to get it and be able to digest it at their own pace as they go along too. I think that's really critical that you're doing that. But thank you for sending me that email. I have no idea how we got on your radar or how it all came together, but I sure am glad it did.
Well, I didn't get to tell you yet. I've known about Rosary Army for quite some time. So that is not the reason. I actually realized it later, like, oh, this is the same people. So when you started talking about it, and I know that's your guys, your coupon code, I believe, right? Where to be able to give $10 off is Rosary Army.
Yeah.
Oh, for the conference.
Yeah. So put in Rosary Army and they can get $10 off. Is that how you sent me the emails? And I admit I just been focusing on this conversation, and I was like, if people put in the coupon, I'm glad you said that. So if they put in Rosary Army when they register, they get $10 off.
We get $10 off.
Awesome.
Exactly. So and thank you guys for having me. I hope that people understand. I wish I could offer it for free. It is hard to put one of these things on. Everybody knows that this stuff takes time and energy and effort, and there are costs associated. We've tried to keep it as low as possible to get as many folks there. And I couldn't agree with you more, Greg. I would encourage the paid version, not as a salesy pitch, but because we talked about pace. And I think operating at your own pace, maybe finding in a sense a relationship, albeit through one of those videos or whatever, with somebody that resonates, I think it would be really, really great for folks, and to be able to revisit that.
And we didn't say the cost. I looked at it. It's like $100, isn't it? $99 or something like that.
It's $98, and with the coupon, it'll be $88, and they'll get that, they'll have access to that archive for a year. So I believe it's well worth it. And thank you both. I mean, this has been really, really fun, and I'm really excited about everything you're doing, because there's a lot. I hope everybody realizes all the things you're doing. I'm ready to start marketing you.
Oh.
This has been great.
Well, thank you for being here. We'll keep pointing people to it, and hopefully they'll see this YouTube video and they'll hear the podcast in advance, and hopefully they'll start having some more hope, and they'll find out for themselves that hope is fuel. Hopeisfuel.com. Ryan Moreau, thanks for being here, my friend.
Thank you, Greg, Jennifer. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.
Again, if you decide to join in on that, Rosary Army is your code when you check out, and you can save a few bucks on that. And listen, we're sharing it, and there is some sort of an affiliate thing, and I told Ryan, I said I don't even really care all that much about that. I wanted to make sure that people got the information. But I think that if you do, there might be a few bucks to go to Rosary Army. But we never even really finalized that. I don't really... It's not something that matters to me. It's the content that matters. Yeah,
and we definitely, if we can create a positive affiliation between Rosary Army and this group, then we think that's a positive thing. And it was kind of great. After the interview, we shared a few private words off air, and he's known about Rosary Army for such a long time, and that always makes us feel like we did something good.
His daughter makes rosary. He told us. That was pretty cool.
It's just so wonderful to hear that the mission that we really believe so much has made an impact in so many other people's lives, including the guests that we have on the show.
One of the things that we talked about was that whole idea of triage. And, I brought that up and didn't really explain it. I kind of threw it out there as just common vernacular. But I think about it, right? In wartime scenario, you have a bunch of people getting injured all at once, and you go through a triage. You quickly take care of what can be fixed right there on the spot. You determine, basically, sadly, who's the lost cause in wartime situations that has happened. And then you may have, we need to have this person go right into surgery right away, or this person needs surgery but can hold off 2 hours or whatever it is. And with mental health issues, sometimes it's that way as well, that a triage is helpful. Are there things that you could do right now that are going to help? And I'm really hesitant to share what I'm about to share, because just last week you said when we started to do the show, should we talk about some of the health related changes that we've been making personally? And I didn't really want to turn that into a long conversation. Just we are trying to make some tweaks using Lent a little bit as an inspiration for the sacrifice that's necessary to make changes that are better for our health, so that we can be more available in sharing the faith, as well as being more available to being there for the family. But a few weeks ago, I did talk about Dr. Andrew Huberman, and I mentioned some of his protocols and some of the things that he's talking about. And I got to say, I've been doing them. And I'm only 2 or 3 weeks in, which is why I'm also hesitant to talk about it as if you should do this, right? I always bristle when someone is really into a movie or TV show or a diet or some new thing, and then they go on this bandwagon where they're convinced that everyone has to do this thing. And I don't want to do that. But, a few years ago I did Exodus 90, and one of their things was cold showers. And I hated it. It was not the time for me. I was not in the right mindset. I really feel like the last few days we've had a thing going on that has caused some, and it's not mental health and it's not chemical. We just had a bit of a disagreement with someone outside of our family, and it's really brought me down. It's really had a negative impact, and it's hit a lot of wounds in dealing with this. And I've been diving into my triage toolkit of how do I calm down. Some of it is prayer. Really been trying to pray for these people that were involved in this situation where there was conflict, and really trying to pray about it and let it go. And that's not always easy, and especially when you have a mind that tends to ruminate and wants to keep going back to the thought, back to the thought, back to the thought. And I'll be praying liturgy of hours, and there they are again. I'm trying to pray my rosary. There they are again. I go outside. There they are again. It's like in my mind constantly. But I have found that if I stick to the routine that I've been trying to develop in the last few weeks, I keep getting little dopamine hits, which that was one of the things that Dr. Huberman talked about, right? Mm-hmm. So taking a cold shower gives a dopamine hit, and I wasn't expecting it the way it does, but that can kind of shock me out of a bad mood, maybe temporarily, maybe only for an hour or two, but it gets me out of it, right? It's a quick triage so that I don't go down into a pit. Same thing I've been trying really hard to get back into my daily discipline of just doing 25 minutes of creative writing. And there are a lot of mornings where I don't want to do it. Yesterday I didn't get it done because Walter was visiting, and he walked in like right when I was about to get in the groove, and he was like, "Where's the coffee?" So I said, well, I better go downstairs and hang out with my son. So I did that instead of write. But today I did it, and I didn't really want to write this morning, and it was really hard to get into it, but I pushed myself through. So there's little things. And then when I actually accomplished it, what happens? Ping, I get a little positive. It's not a huge rush, but it's a little hit. I've been doing 10 minutes of exercise on top of, I've been going for the walk in the morning and praying the rosary with you, and that helps. But about 3 or 4 days a week, I'm trying to do this little 10-minute workout. I just tried it. I thought, well, I'll give these things a shot. But Netflix added a whole bunch of, if you type in, I think it's Nike. I thought it was Adidas, but I think it's Nike. Nike workout. If you type in workout, there's all these workout videos. They're like 10, 20, 30-minute videos. And I did one today. And I, it knocks me out of my pattern, right? Mm-hmm. It just knocks me out of my tendency to get into the groove of the negativity, which, we talked about that years ago, the whole idea of a record player, right? A record player needle wants to get into that groove, and once it's in that groove, it'll stay, as long as it keeps playing. And it's really hard to get the needle out of the groove and onto another track. Think about when you're trying to, if you have the full 33, for those of you who remember this, the full 33, and you're trying to get it to a particular song, right? You're trying to get it right on the right groove, on the correct groove for that. That's the third song. So there's that big thick black line. There's that big thick black line. I want that right, and you'll get a bunch of weird sounds before you finally get the song. The needle wants to default just into any groove, and sometimes it's that negative groove. And so I was thinking about that whole triage idea while we were talking, and I hope that if you do watch these videos, whether you do the free thing or you sign up so you can be a part of the QA and have it on demand, I hope it'll do a little triage for you, that you'll just go, okay, like Ryan said, that you'll have a little bit of hope, and that hope give you that little dopamine, that hope help you take the next step, that hope showing you that things will improve over time.
How awesome is it that he actually gave us a tangible 4-step discernment process right there at the end of the show? I just love it. As soon as he was describing each step, I tried to commit it to memory so that I wouldn't forget the letters that he said. But just in case you're just like, oh yeah, he did say that. What is it? It was like FAFT. The first F is you need to face that negativity and just look at it. Don't try to run away for it or try to brush it away, but face it. Face that flare up, that cortisol bath. And then accept it was the second phase. And just know that you've been here before, you're going to get out of it again. And then the other F was, once you've faced it, then you've accepted it, then you just got to float along with it rather than try to flail against it, but you float and you become sort of cooperative so that eventually it'll take you to a safer, more docile place, but only after the passage of time. So you can't rush it, you can't speed it up, but you're at the mercy of it. But it will recede, it will go down. And so FAFT, I thought, that's just brilliant. And a lot of it, even though that's probably more of maybe a secular help tool, that's not necessarily spiritual, but it is awfully complementary to the discernment of spirits. Something about it sort of reminded me of St. Ignatius of Loyola's rules. And just this idea of kind of seeing it for what it is, realizing that, yes, you're in it right now, but it will pass. That's a little bit like desolation and consolation. When you're in desolation, just like, okay, face it, accept it, you're in it. God could still use that, right? And then it'll pass. You'll get out of it. There's a consolation that will come. So 2 different camps, spiritual, secular, but they're oddly complementary even here. That kind of jumped out at me.
It reminded me of a teaching when I was, if you've been listening for a while, you know that about 5 years ago, I ended up being in an intensive outpatient program for mental health issues. And one of the things that was an idea of the floating thing, there's different ways of saying it, depending on, because I don't want it to sound new agey at all. It's not. It's more feel it, right? You can float through it, but you're feeling it or letting it pass over you. You're in the, so think about in the middle of the pain that you might be in, you could feel it, but just let the pain pass. It's like there's a difference between when you slam a hammer on your thumb tip, it hurts really bad at the beginning, but you can just feel it. And if you pay attention to it, you could feel it might still be throbbing, it might still hurt, but it does subside, and it's okay to feel it, and it's okay to let it be there, and it's okay to let it just kind of float past you to go past you. And it's also, that's an area right there. And it's really difficult, I think, for mental health, particularly depression, to offer it up at that moment. If you have that ability to imagine Jesus on the cross, to imagine his suffering wounds, and to say, Lord, I want to endure this right now with you so that we're both suffering together. You're suffering on the cross, I'm suffering here. And that in some way, in my trying to be like you in how you suffer, that maybe I can console you in some capacity. And that's helpful. But it's not that, when you are having a mental hissy fit, it's not always possible to have rational thought to be able to do that.
I did find it awfully affirming to hear another man talk about those realities of when you're in that emotional flare. I found that as rather affirming to the words I've heard you share with me when you were in it, or maybe when you're just coming out of it, then you can finally talk about it with a clear head. But it's really great hearing that you're not alone in this particular suffering. And one thing, Greg, I wanted to tell you that you're not alone. Another thing, I don't know if I've really shared this with you, but I'm trying to experiment with taking cold shower endings. I may not start with it cold, but I'm wanting to see just how cold can I take it, just to see, because a lot of times women's like, oh no, don't touch the shower. It will be warm. It will be hot. It ain't ever going to be cold. But I wanted to see, well, what would happen? Just how bad is it? I was just total curiosity.
So like how long?
Well,
like 10 seconds or a minute?
No, I mean, I wouldn't rush it. I would just feel it and totally get saturated in that cold water, because I wanted to experiment with that rising core temperature, which is the side effect of being in the cold shower. And you know what, ladies? I didn't die. I survived this experience. And in fact, for the last couple of days, if not week or more, I've been ending all of my showers cold, but I started actually lukewarm. I don't even go to hot anymore because I want to wake up. That's kind of the point. I'm not trying to use the shower to put me to sleep. And I realized the hot water was keeping me down, which is a weird thing. The heat kept me down. It was like I was trying to sleep in the shower. I'm like, why am I doing this? This is like the opposite of what I want right now. I have to mess with the temperature. It just seemed logical at this point. So once I bumped it to cold, it was just another springboard of energy that kind of propelled me to my day. And so you're not the only one dealing with water, and having a positive, using water to help, further your goals. Basically.
All right. So because this was not supposed to be about our shower habits, but
oh dear.
Two more quick points. One serious and one funny about the cold showers. And I'm hesitant to share it because it sounds like I'm bragging, and I don't want to do that. But maybe this will help you if you're thinking about it. And again, it's Lent, right? So here's a practice. You can give up the hot water. And I had read, and listening to Dr. Huberman and other places, what's the best way of going about the cold shower? and because the first few times I did it, it was terrible. It was miserable. I felt like I was doing it wrong and everything else. And part of it was because just the design of ours, to step into the already cold water is very hard. And instead, what I did was I stepped into the shower with no water running. And I just kind of stopped, and I actually prayed. And there's a series of prayers, and I've been doing this, and this is what helps. And it's actually, it's weird when you do something that's supposed to be a sacrifice, but then you realize that you're being blessed by doing it. And then you're going, well, does my sacrifice still count then if I'm being blessed? Because the thing I say is, it's scary to do it. I'm afraid. The first few times I was afraid. And so I actually said, in the name of Jesus Christ, I renounce this fear. And in the name of Jesus Christ, I rebuke this evil spirit of fear. And then I imagine our Blessed Mother at the foot of Jesus. And then I look up and I try to imagine Jesus on the cross and the pain that he's in. And then I imagine, what happened even before that and his scourging at the pillar and those lashes with those whips. And that's kind of what it feels like when the cold water hits you for the first time. And so I say, I offer this up in just some level of consolation, Lord, and for the conversion of the world and for my own sins and, in answer to prayer for those, neighbors that maybe upset us or whatever it might have been. And then I don't hesitate and I just turn it on cold. And it's hard to do. I won't lie to you. It's a suffering, but it's glorious at the same time. And I think that's part of where that little endorphin rush, that dopamine's coming from, because I can very much believe and I think about Jesus the whole time. It's amazing. When I put my mind in that mindset, the whole time I'm washing my face and, I'm thinking about Jesus, and it's pretty amazing. And it actually makes me want to do it more, which is very strange. So
who knew such a powerful spiritual battleground would be right there in the shower stall?
I wish Exodus 90.
It is a real thing.
I wish Exodus 90 explained it in that way. They treat it more from a
sexual purity,
a sexual purity type thing, and. Someone in their 50s, that wasn't resonating with me. That was not an issue that I had to deal with. But this is something different. I can get behind this. But the funny story, and I didn't tell you about this, is the other day. The other day, I was taking a deliberate cold shower, and you went in and you flushed the toilet.
Did it have an impact on your shower?
It just went like a few degrees warm. And I went, oh, well, I can't do anything about that. And then it got freezing cold again. I was like, I was really surprised.
It turned warm.
Yeah, normally it's like amazing cold.
Oh, yeah.
And so anyway,
a little reprieve.
I kind of laughed. I was like, well, that was unexpected. So,
okay, I have a question to ask you. I know we got to wrap this up. But at night, when you're getting ready to go to sleep, have you noticed anything about your body temperature wanting to get a surge of like body chills? Like right as you're getting ready to kind of go into the mode of sleep and your brain is now going to shut down. You don't? Okay. Every night I'm paying attention to the body temperature thing, right? Like creating winter in your body or summer in your body, raising your core temperature, lowering your core temperature. You know, when you raise your core temperature, you're awake and you're ready to do stuff. And when it goes down, it's preparing for sleep. And so I feel that change. I feel like this wonderful sensation of chills that you just love to feel when you're snuggling up with that blanket and it just feels right. That's when I know I'm going to be asleep in 1 minute.
Yeah.
Without fail, I'll say, all right. Then I say my final prayers and then I'm out. And it's always linked with a temperature change that I distinctly feel every single time that I prepare for sleep. And I just wondered, am I alone in that? I guess I am.
No, because I'm not premenopausal. Thanks for hanging out with us for another edition of the show. HopeIsFuel.com. Go check that out. If you want a free rosary, visit rosaryarmy.com. We'd appreciate your financial support. rosaryarmy.com/donate. We need your help. Pray your rosary today.
And do whatever it takes to be holy.
Talk to you in a few days. God bless.